She gave her only food away, not knowing she had just saved the Alpha King. The night did not ease into the cold. It arrived like a punishment. Frost had already claimed the dirt roads of Harlow's Edge, the poorest district at the outermost rim of the Ashvale Kingdom, and the wind moved through the crumbling stone alleys like something that had been angry for a very long time. Against a half-collapsed wall, in the guttering shadow between two broken torches, a man sat on frozen ground. His coat was nothing more than a torn canvas wrapper held shut by a strip of rope. His hands broad, rough-knuckled, calloused in ways that told a story of labor, were pressed flat against the earth, trembling. Not from fear, from effort. The effort of staying upright, staying conscious, staying alive. He raised his head just enough to speak. "Please." His voice cracked down the middle of the word, the way old wood does before it finally gives. "Anything. Just something to eat." The two men standing nearest to him barely glanced down. Anthony, broad-shouldered, hard-jawed, dressed in the black and gold uniform of Kenneth's personal enforcers, stepped forward and crouched just low enough to bring his face level with the beggar's. His expression was the kind of cold that had nothing to do with the weather. "You're fouling up the entrance to a nobleman's road," Anthony said quietly, "the way dangerous men speak when they want you to understand they don't need to shout. Move, or I move you myself." The beggar did not argue. He did not fight. He simply looked up, and for one single, flickering instant, barely a breath long, his eyes lit gold. Then the color faded, and he was just a broken man again. Anthony stood, dusted off his knee, and spoke to his companion without looking back. "If he's still here in an hour, drag him to the outer field." They walked away laughing. The beggar exhaled slowly. One breath, two. His jaw tightened, because this was not just a beggar. The man sitting in the dirt, trembling against a frozen wall, too weak to stand, too stubborn to fall, was Arthur, the Alpha King of Ashvale. And he had just watched one of his own enforcers kick a starving man and walk away laughing. "Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? Thank you so much for being here. Truly means the world to me, more than I can say. Stories like this one only travel as far as the people who believe in them, and you showing up right now. That matters. If this story is already pulling at something inside you, if it is making you feel something, do not just scroll away. Be part of this journey. Hit that subscribe button for us, smash the like, and drop a comment telling us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. Keep stories like this alive. Alright, now let us get back to where we left off. 7 days earlier, Arthur had sat at the head of a table long enough to seat 40 men. The grand hall of Ashvale Keep had been warm, lit by a dozen iron chandeliers, and the food had been plentiful. His commander Christopher had set a report on the table, 12 pages of careful, measured language, and waited while Arthur read. The report was about Harlow's Edge. It detailed taxation records that did not match population counts. It described food distribution logs that showed deliveries leaving the capital warehouse and never arriving at the district storehouse. It noted that 2 separate grain transports had been rerouted in the last 3 months, and that the rerouting authorization had been signed by Kenneth, the High Steward of the Outer Districts, Arthur's most senior regional administrator. "How long has this been going on?" Arthur asked without looking up. "Our earliest confirmed irregularity is 14 months ago," Christopher said. "But the pattern suggests it started well before that. We believe the visible records are only what was too sloppy to hide." Arthur set the pages down. He looked at the window. The capital skyline was clean, bright, and ordered. The kind of view that made a kingdom look like it was functioning perfectly. And the people in Harlow's Edge? "Hungry, my king. Some are hungry." Arthur was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm going." Christopher straightened. "With how many men?" "None." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. "Arthur, if I arrive with soldiers, Kenneth knows. If Kenneth knows, everything gets cleaned up before I see a single truth." Arthur pushed back his chair. "I need to see what my kingdom actually looks like from the ground. Not from a report. Not from a window." Christopher had argued. He had used words like reckless and protocol, and the council would not allow it. Arthur had listened to all of it respectfully. And then he had packed a bag, pulled on the worst clothing he could find in the castle's charity stores, and left before sunrise. He had been in Harlow's Edge for 6 days when the silver poisoning hit him. It had not been deliberate, at least he did not think so. A contaminated water source near the eastern slums, shared unknowingly. Silver, in small doses, did not kill a wolf immediately. It worked slowly. It cut the connection between body and instinct like snipping a wire. It made the strength drain out of you in ways that felt like ordinary exhaustion until suddenly you were on your knees and could not explain why. By the night Evelyn found him, Arthur had not eaten in nearly 2 days. He was not performing helplessly. He was living it. And what he had already seen in 6 days, the hollow-cheeked children, the shuttered market stalls, the enforcers patrolling not to protect but to collect, had settled into his chest like something that could not be unfelt. He had built this kingdom. He had signed its laws, appointed its stewards, and approved its budgets. And somehow right beneath his signature it had rotted. A man in power who stops walking among his people does not just lose touch. He loses accountability. He loses the truth. And eventually he loses the right to call what he holds a kingdom at all. Arthur understood that now, sitting in the dirt, in the cold, with gold fading from his eyes and his body close to failing. He understood it in a way no report had ever made him understand anything. She came around the corner quietly. Not sneaking, there was nothing theatrical about it. She was simply a woman who had learned to move through her world without announcing herself, because announcing yourself in Harlow's Edge sometimes invited exactly the wrong kind of attention. Her name was Evelyn. I am 23 years old. Long pale hair braided loosely over one shoulder, the braid fraying at the end the way it always did by the 3rd day without a proper comb. Her dress was clean brown wool, despite everything, because she scrubbed it every other evening and hung it above the chimney flue to dry overnight. Her cloak was too thin for the weather, but it was hers, and she kept the top button fastened. She had worked 14 hours that day at the miller's grain house sorting, stacking, carrying, and she had been paid in 2 things. A copper coin and a small round loaf of bread, dense and slightly overbaked, the kind the miller gave out when the batch did not sell. It was the only food she had. She had been saving the bread in the pocket of her cloak all day, telling herself she would eat it when she got home. Home was a single room above an abandoned tannery, with a cot, a crate, and a candle stub she nursed to last. She saw Arthur before she meant to. She had turned the corner heading home, and there he was slumped against the wall, one hand pressed to the ground like it was the only thing keeping him attached to the earth. His eyes were half open. His breathing was shallow, the kind of shallow that people did not always come back from. Evelyn stopped. She looked down the alley in both directions. No one was watching. Anthony's patrol had moved on. The street was empty and cold. She crouched down. "Hey," she said softly. "You're in a bad spot." The man opened his eyes. They were gray, tired, deep, focused in a way that did not quite match the rest of him, like a fire burning at the bottom of a well. "I'm fine," he said. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her cloak pocket, broke the bread in half and held one piece out. Arthur looked at the bread, then at her. "That's your food," he said. "Half of it is. You earned it." "So did you," she said. "You've been sitting out here all day. I walked past this morning." He was quiet. "Don't make it complicated," Evelyn said. "Just eat it." He took it. The bread was dense and dry and slightly burnt at the bottom. It was the best thing Arthur had tasted in a week. He ate it in careful bites, the way you eat when your stomach has forgotten how to receive things without flinching. The effect was almost immediate. Not dramatic, not magical, just the trembling eased. The gray at the edges of his vision pulled back. Something essential returned to him. He did not fully understand yet what had happened, but the bread and the small mercy of it had given his body just enough fuel to begin fighting the silver out. "Can you stand?" Evelyn asked. "Yes." "Where are you sleeping tonight?" A pause. Then, honestly, "I was not sure." Evelyn sighed. It was the sigh of someone who knew better and was going to do the thing anyway. "There's a covered space behind the tannery. Not warm, but it blocks the wind. I'll show you. Arthur stood slowly, careful not to show too much ease in the movement, and followed her down the dark street. He noticed how she walked, not hurrying, but her eyes tracked everything. The shadow in the doorway, the alley mouth, the figure at the far end of the block who was not moving. She had learned to read danger the way a navigator reads a coastline. Constantly, without flinching, as a matter of survival. This woman, Arthur thought, has been managing alone for a very long time. And she still gave you the last half of her bread. Kenneth's office in the Harlow's Edge district house smelled of cedar oil and paper. He kept it immaculate. The desk was always clear, the accounts always filed, the ledgers always balanced, or at least, they always appeared to balance, which in Kenneth's view amounted to the same thing. He was 51 years old, sharp-featured, thin in the precise way of someone who had never gone truly hungry but understood hunger as a concept he could use. He wore silver rings on 3 fingers not for vanity, but because he had learned early in his career that people treated a man differently depending on what he was wearing. Appearance was leverage. He had built an entire philosophy around it. That evening, Anthony stood before his desk. "The Mill District is getting restless," Anthony reported. "There are 2 men, David and William, who have been talking to people, gathering them in the evenings. Nothing organized yet. Just talk. Talk becomes plans," Kenneth said, without looking up from the document he was annotating. "I can have them detained." "Not yet." Kenneth set down his pen. "Detention makes them interesting. Right now they're just 2 hungry men with opinions. Let them talk. Monitor them. The moment they become useful as an example, then we move." Anthony nodded. "The grain transport?" Kenneth asked. "Rerouted as planned. Lord Harwick's estate receives the 2nd shipment. The district warehouse log will show it arrived and was distributed. And the people who would notice the discrepancy? Reassigned to the outer road detail. Gone before anyone asks questions." Kenneth allowed himself a small, private satisfaction. This was the part he was good at, not the violence, never the violence directly, that was Anthony's domain, but the architecture of it. The careful construction of a system that looked, from above, exactly as it was supposed to look, while beneath the surface it served entirely different purposes. He thought about the king's supposed diplomatic trip. He had heard no confirming details. No advance guard had passed through. No official correspondence had updated the regional schedule. Arthur was, according to the Capital Dispatch, somewhere along the northern coast for 2 weeks of formal visits, which meant Harlow's Edge had 2 more weeks of breathing room. Kenneth picked up his pen again. "Make sure the district looks presentable by next month," he said. "Just in case." "Presentable or actually improved?" Kenneth looked up. His expression carried the faint amusement of a man who considered the question naive. "Presentable," he said. "Always presentable." Arthur spent 3 days in the covered space behind the tannery. Evelyn brought him water from the pump on her way to work each morning. Not enough to make a fuss about, just a clay cup left on the ledge with a piece of cloth to keep the dust out. She did not ask questions. She did not perform her kindness for an audience. It was simply a thing she did, the way she kept the stoop swept and the candle rationed quietly, habitually, because it was the right thing to do. On the 2nd day, Arthur was well enough to sit outside. On the 3rd, he helped an elderly neighbor carry a bundle of firewood up 3 flights of stairs without being asked. Evelyn watched this from the alley and said nothing, but something in her expression shifted. On the 4th evening, she brought him a bowl of thin soup, turnip and salt, from a pot she was already making, and sat on the step across from him while they both ate. "You're not from here," she said. It was not an accusation, just an observation. "No. Running from something or looking for something?" Arthur considered that for a moment. "Looking," he said. "I needed to see something true." "And have you?" He looked at the street, at the dark windows where families sat without enough lamp oil to light the room properly, at the patched walls and the empty market corner, and the way children moved through the district in pairs because single children had started disappearing near the enforcer patrols. "More than I expected," he said quietly. She nodded like she understood, though she did not know what he meant by it. "My father used to say the worst part of suffering isn't the suffering itself. is being invisible while you're suffering. It's knowing people above you are making decisions about your life and have never once come down to stand in it. Arthur was quiet. Was he right? He asked. Every single day, she said. They sat in silence for a while. The wind moved through the alley. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing a very old song on a battered string instrument, a slow, sad melody that had probably been written by someone who lived exactly where they were sitting right now. Arthur looked at Evelyn. She was watching the dark with her chin resting on her knee, entirely at peace in the way that only people who have made peace with very hard things can be. There was no bitterness in it, no resignation, just a quiet, stubborn endurance. He thought, I do not deserve what she gave me. Not the bread, not the water, not the shelter, not this conversation. And then, with a clarity that surprised him, I am going to make this right. Not as a reward, not as a transaction, as a correction. Long overdue. It was David who told him the truth about the grain. Not intentionally, not because he knew who Arthur was, but because David was the kind of man who, when he finally decided to trust someone, trusted them all the way. He was 28, broad across the shoulders from years of hauling at the dock warehouses, with a scar above his left eye from an altercation with one of Anthony's men 6 months prior. He had a dry, dark sense of humor that unexpectedly surfaced, the kind of humor that people develop when the alternative is something much worse. He had seen Arthur helping the elderly neighbor with the firewood. He had watched him quietly for 2 days after that. And then one evening he had come and sat next to him on the step and said, without preamble, "You want to know what's actually happening here? Or are you just passing through?" "I want to know," Arthur said. David looked at him for a long moment. Then he began to talk. The grain is rerouted. The false delivery records. The way the district's annual tax obligation had been quietly increased, while the services that tax was meant to fund had been quietly removed. The water pump in the East Quarter that had been broken for 4 months. Kenneth had sent a repair order, signed it, logged it, and then simply never sent anyone to do the work. On paper, the pump was fixed. In reality, the families in the East Quarter were walking 40 minutes each way to the next district's water source. And when people complain? Arthur asked. They get a visit from Anthony. What does Anthony do? David's jaw tightened. Enough that they stop complaining. William, who had been listening from the doorway, added, "My brother tried to file a formal petition last year. He was told petitions from Harlow's Edge were being forwarded to the High Steward's office for review." A pause. Kenneth's office. Arthur said nothing. "We've been trying to gather enough people to send a delegation to the capital," David said, "to reach the king directly. But half the people here are afraid to put their names to anything. They're not wrong to be afraid. The last man who got too vocal was found outside the district with 2 broken hands." He looked at Arthur. "They said he fell." Arthur thought about the report Christopher had put on his table. 12 pages of careful, measured language. He thought about how he had read it and said, "I'm going," as if it were a choice. What he understood now, sitting in this alley, listening to these 2 men describe a system of cruelty dressed in administrative language, was that it was not a choice. It had been an obligation that had waited too long. He thought about his father, the previous Alpha King, who had once said, "A king who rules by decree alone is not a king. He is a landlord. The difference is whether or not the people beneath you feel the weight of your responsibility toward them." His father had said that. He had written it in a journal somewhere. And somehow, somewhere along the years of sitting at long tables and reading 12-page reports, Arthur had drifted so far from it that it had taken a half piece of bread from a starving woman to pull him back. "What are your names?" he asked, though he would not tell them his. "David. William." "Don't gather the delegation yet," Arthur said. "Give me 5 more days." David looked at him. "Why?" "Because I think I can do more than a delegation." The 2 men exchanged a glance. There was skepticism in it. There was also the fragile, dangerous thing that desperate people carry around like kindling hope. 5 days, David said. Arthur sent word to Christopher on day 11. He had waited long enough to be certain. The message was short: a location, a time, a three-word signal phrase they had agreed on years ago. Christopher received it, understood it, and arrived at the edge of Harlow's Edge at dawn on day 13 with 40 royal guards in civilian dress, 2 court scribes, and a sealed chest of official documentation. He found Arthur outside the tannery, eating porridge from a clay bowl with a borrowed spoon. Christopher looked at him for a moment, the state of him. The dirt and the worn clothes and the bruise still fading along his jaw from an altercation with one of Anthony's men who had not recognized what he was pushing around, and then he said, carefully, "Are you all right?" "I'm the best I've been in years," Arthur said. "Sit down. I need to walk you through everything." He walked Christopher through all of it. The grain is rerouted. The water pump. The petition system used as a trap. The enforcer brutality used as a silencer. The financial records falsified so elegantly that it had taken someone physically living in the district to spot the gaps. Christopher listened without interrupting. He wrote nothing down. He had a memory built for exactly this, trained by years of military briefings, and when Arthur finished, he said, "How much do you want to expose tonight versus preserve for formal proceedings?" "Everything tonight," Arthur said. "Formal proceedings can handle the aftermath. I want the people of this district to be present when this comes apart. They've earned that." Christopher nodded once. Professional. Precise. Then, because he had known Arthur for 15 years and understood that the personal and the official were not always separate. "Who is she?" Arthur looked at him. "The woman," Christopher said, without any expression at all. "The one who lives above the tannery." A long pause. "Her name is Evelyn," Arthur said. And she fed me when I had nothing. She didn't ask what I could give her in return. She didn't even ask my name. She just said." He stopped. I looked at the bowl in his hands. "She just did the right thing. Because she could." Christopher considered this. "She doesn't know who you are." "No. You're going to need to tell her." "I know. Before tonight." "I know that too." Arthur set the bowl down. "The last thing I want is for her to find out in front of a crowd." He found Evelyn at the pump on Marsh Lane, filling the 2 clay jugs she carried every morning. She had her sleeves rolled to the elbow and a streak of soap on her wrist from washing her dress the night before, and when she saw him coming down the street with a look on his face she had not seen before, she stopped. "What happened?" she asked immediately, because Evelyn was the kind of person who read a person's expression before they opened their mouth. Arthur stood in front of her. He spent a moment deciding how to begin. Then he told her. He did not dress it up. He did not soften it with ceremony or preface it with titles. He simply said, in plain language, who he was, why he had come, what he had been when she found him against the wall, what she had done by giving him the bread, and what was going to happen tonight. Evelyn listened. Her expression did several things in succession that she did not bother to hide. Surprise, disbelief, something that flickered very close to anger, then a long stillness in which he could see her working through it with the same quiet, methodical precision with which she approached everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "The gold in your eyes that night, that was real." "Yes." Another silence. "I'm not going to pretend this is a normal conversation," she said finally. "Because it isn't." "No, it isn't. You've been here for 2 weeks, eating what people gave you, sleeping where they let you." "Yes. And now tonight everything changes." "Yes, for everyone in this district. For better. Permanently." She looked at him for a long time. Then she picked up her jugs. "Don't be late," she said, and walked home. He stood in the street watching her go and felt something happen in his chest that he did not have a word for in the official language of kings. But he understood it. Completely. Kenneth had called a district assembly for that evening. He did this periodically gathering of the district residents in the open yard beside the district house, where he would stand on the steps and read from a prepared script about infrastructure progress and community development. The residents were required to attend. It was not technically compulsory, but Anthony's men had a way of appearing at the doors of households that did not show up, which had the same practical effect. Kenneth liked these assemblies. He liked the way the crowd looked up at him. He liked the formality of it, the control. He did not like what happened at the beginning of this one. He was halfway through his opening remarks about the successful completion of the water infrastructure review, delivered with the smooth confidence of a man who had said false things so many times they had stopped feeling false, when the outer gate of the district yard opened. And Arthur walked in. Not in rags. In the deep charcoal gray of the Asheville royal court dress, the kind worn for unannounced official functions. Understated but unmistakable to anyone who had ever seen the king in person. Christopher walked one step behind him and to the left, bearing the royal seal. 40 guards in full uniform spread quietly through the yard's perimeter. The murmur that went through the crowd was not one noise. It was a dozen overlapping noises: recognition, shock, confusion, and, from several people near the back, something that sounded dangerously close to a cheer that got swallowed before it could fully form. Kenneth went very still on his steps. Anthony, standing at the yard's edge, moved his hand instinctively to his side, and then stopped when he realized what he was reaching for and what reaching for it would mean. Arthur walked to the center of the yard. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. There is a particular quality of presence that some people carry, not shouted or performed, but simply there, solid as masonry, and Arthur carried it like weather. "I've been in this district for 13 days, he said. Silence. "I've slept in your alleys. I've eaten what your neighbors were generous enough to share. I've walked your streets at night and your market in the morning and your pump route in the afternoon." He looked at Kenneth. "And I have seen things that should have been corrected 14 months ago or longer. Things that were hidden deliberately. Things that were permitted to continue because the people responsible believed correctly, until now that no one above them would ever come down far enough to see." Kenneth opened his mouth. "Do not," Arthur said quietly. Kenneth closed it. Arthur turned to Christopher, who opened the sealed chest. Inside were documents, originals, not copies of the rerouted grain authorizations, the falsified delivery records, the signed repair orders for work that was never done, the financial discrepancies across 14 months. Christopher had spent the previous 24 hours quietly collecting them from the Capitol Archive while Arthur had been in the district. "High Steward Kenneth," Arthur said. "You are relieved of your position, effective at this moment. Your accounts, your office, and your household are under royal seizure pending full investigation. You will be escorted to the Capitol tonight and held for formal proceedings." He looked at Anthony. "Enforcer Anthony, you are relieved of your commission. The specific cases of physical intimidation against residents of this district, I have names, dates, and witnesses, will be reviewed by the court. You will accompany Kenneth." Anthony's face did several complicated things. He did not move. 2 of Christopher's guards stepped forward, which resolved the question of movement. Arthur turned back to the crowd. He saw David near the front, arms crossed, jaw tight, an expression on his face that was not quite triumph but was adjacent to it, the look of someone who had been told he was wrong about something for a very long time and had just been proved right. He saw William beside him, whose brother had filed the petition, whose brother had been told it was being reviewed. He saw the elderly neighbor from the 3rd floor, the children in pairs, the woman who sold second-hand cloth from her doorstep because the market stall permits had been priced beyond her reach. He saw all of them, and then he looked to the left edge of the crowd. Evelyn was standing near the wall, her cloak fastened at the throat, her hands still. She had come, as she always came to the required assembly, quietly and without making a fuss. She met his eyes across the yard. She did not look away. Arthur spoke to the crowd again. "There is one more thing." He walked toward the left edge. People moved aside. Not because they were told, no one told them to, but because something about the direction of it made them understand, instinctively, that this was important. He stopped in front of Evelyn. She looked at him with the steady expression of a woman who had decided, sometime in the last 6 hours, to meet whatever happened with both feet on the ground. Arthur reached into the inner pocket of his court jacket. He produced a small, flat token, dark wood, carved with the Asheville seal, the kind presented only in recognition of direct service to the crown. He held it out. 13 days ago, he said, clearly enough for the people around them to hear, I was against that wall, poisoned, starving, invisible. He paused. And you stopped. You broke your last piece of bread in half and you gave it to a stranger without asking what you would receive in return. He could hear the silence in the yard. That bread kept me alive long enough to remember what I was here to do. Evelyn looked at the token, then at him. Arthur, she said very quietly, you don't owe me anything. No, he agreed. This isn't a debt. It's a recognition. He held her gaze. There is more I want to say to you, but not here. Not tonight. Tonight belongs to this district. She took the token. Her hand was steady. So was his. And somewhere in the crowd, David made a sound that started as a laugh and ended as something else entirely. The proceedings lasted 6 weeks. Kenneth's accounts, once fully examined, revealed a scheme more extensive than the initial reports had shown. Funds meant for 7 outer districts had been partially diverted over a period of nearly 2 years, routed through a network of cooperative middlemen, 2 of whom were minor nobility whose names caused a considerable scandal when they appeared in the court record. Kenneth stood before the formal council in the Grand Hall of Ashvale Keep and offered, initially, the defense that he had acted within the authority granted to him by the stewardship charter. He cited precedent. He cited historical interpretations of administrative discretion. He was well-prepared, well-spoken, and completely unconvincing, because the king had seen it with his own eyes. He was stripped of his title, his estate, and his holdings. He was barred from any administrative office, from the capital, and from any of the 7 outer districts he had administered. It was not the most dramatic punishment, but it was permanent and it was public. And in the world of men like Kenneth, men who had built their entire existence on the architecture of being seen in the right rooms, the loss of the room mattered more than anything else. Anthony was tried separately, for residents of Harlow's Edge provided formal testimony. One of them was William's brother, who had to be helped to the chair because of an old injury that had healed wrong. The enforcer commissioner who had employed Anthony without proper oversight of his conduct was also formally censured. Anthony was sentenced to 2 years of enforced service in a rural labor program, an uncommon but legal sentencing structure, one that Arthur's legal team argued specifically because it involved Anthony working alongside the kind of people he had spent years intimidating. There was a certain poetic justice in the arrangement that the court scribes recorded with unusual stylistic enthusiasm. David and William were formally received at the capital 3 weeks after the assembly. They arrived in borrowed good coats and arrived back in Harlow's Edge with appointments. David became the district's first elected resident liaison, a new position Arthur created specifically to institutionalize the kind of direct communication that he had lacked for too long. William, who had a meticulous mind and a long memory for detail, was appointed to assist in the district records review. The water pump on the East Quarter was fixed in 11 days. An actual repair crew arrived with actual materials and actually did the work. David watched them from the street and said something quietly to William that William refused to repeat to anyone. But he was smiling when he said it didn't matter. The grain allocations were restored. The false delivery records were expunged and the real deliveries began arriving on the 1st of each month, logged by a new oversight clerk who answered directly to Christopher. The market stall permits were repriced to levels that reflected the actual economic capacity of the district. The children stopped moving in pairs. He came back to Harlow's Edge on a Tuesday. Officially, it was a district inspection visit, one of 6 scheduled as part of the new outer district accountability program he had implemented. Unofficially, he had asked Christopher to schedule this one first. He found Evelyn at the grain house because of course he did. She had been promoted, or more accurately, she had been given the proper wage for the work she had always been doing, plus the additional role of shift supervisor, which meant she now managed the sorting floor and had a desk in the back corner that she had decorated with exactly nothing except a small clay cup she used for water. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Her expression did the thing it always did when he arrived unexpectedly. A brief flicker of something she quickly arranged into composure. "You're early," she said. "The inspection isn't until this afternoon." "Then why are you here now?" He stepped inside. The grain house was warm, smelled of dry wheat and old wood, and the sound of the sorting floor behind the partition was steady and purposeful. "Because I wanted to see you without an audience," he said. "And because I have been thinking about something you said." "Which thing?" "The worst part of suffering isn't the suffering. It's invisible." Evelyn was quiet. "You said that about your father," Arthur said. "But you could have said it about yourself." She looked at her desk. then back at him. "I wasn't looking to be seen," she said. "I was just trying to live." "I know. He paused. "That's what made it different. You weren't kind to me because you expected something. You weren't generous because it served you. You were just you." A long pause. "Arthur." Her voice was careful. "I don't know how to. I am a grain house shift supervisor in the outer district. I don't know what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything yet," he said. "I'm being honest, which is something I was not always good at in either direction. I'm telling you what I know, that you changed something in me, that I think about this district differently because I walked through it with you, that I would like, if you're willing, to keep talking to you, as people do." Slowly, Evelyn looked at him for a long time. Then she stood, walked to the small corner shelf, poured water into her clay cup, and held it out. "Sit down," she said. "You look like you've been in a carriage since before dawn." He sat. He took the water. She sat across from him, and the grain house was warm, and outside the district was already beginning to sound different, less tense, less quiet in the bad way, and they talked. Not about kingdoms or titles or what came next. Just talked. Like two people who have decided, quietly and without ceremony, to become important to each other. Took time. It was not a story told in weeks. Real things rarely are. It took repeated visits, and long letters written in the plain language they had both learned to use with each other. And a notable afternoon when David spotted Arthur waiting outside the grain house with what could only be described as a man's expression when he is more nervous than he believes he is showing. And David said to William, "I'll bet you a month's wages." And William said, "That's not a bet I'm taking." It took the night Arthur brought Evelyn to the keep for the first time, not ceremonially, not as a formal presentation, but on a quiet evening when the hall was dim and the kitchen had made too much soup, and he wanted her to see where he lived with the same honesty she had extended to him. She had walked through the high-ceilinged rooms with her arms at her sides and her eyes wide, and then she had said very sincerely, "You must be absolutely freezing in winter." He had laughed for the first time in longer than he could remember. The formal announcement came in the spring quietly, as all honest things are done, that the Alpha King of Ashvale had chosen a partner not from the nobility, not from alliance negotiations, not from the long list of politically advantageous candidates that the council had been refining for 3 years. He had chosen a woman from the outer district, a grain house supervisor, a woman who had once given a stranger half her last piece of bread on a frozen night and asked for nothing in return. The council had opinions. Several of them were very vocal. Arthur listened to all of them with the patience of a man who has already made up his mind. "I have spent my career telling my people that the strength of this kingdom lies not in its walls but in its people," he said finally. "Every one of you has quoted that back to me at some point. I am now asking you to mean it." The council voted. It was not unanimous, but it passed. What this story teaches: there is a kind of leadership that believes distance is dignity, that staying above the people you serve protects your judgment. Arthur believed that once. What he learned in 13 days in Harlow's Edge was that distance is not wisdom. Distance is blindness dressed in ceremony. The further a leader moves from the lived experience of the people they govern, the more they become dependent on second-hand information, and second-hand information can be shaped, filtered, and corrupted by the people who relay it. Corruption does not always wear a villain's face. More often, it wears an administrator's neat handwriting, a signed authorization, a filed report. It lives in the gap between what the ledger says and what the people in the street know to be true. The safeguard against it is not more regulation, though regulation matters. The safeguard is proximity, the willingness of those in power to come down from their positions at personal cost and stand where the people they serve are standing. Evelyn teaches the other half of this. She had nothing. The bread she gave away was the only food she had. There was no rational argument for giving it, no return on investment, no strategic advantage, no audience to witness and reward her generosity. She gave it because she could, because someone needed it, because she had, in her quiet and uncompromising way, decided that what little she had was still enough to share. That is not a small thing. In a world that teaches people to hold tightly to what they have because no one is coming to replace it, the choice to open your hand anyway is an act of profound courage. Changed a kingdom. Not in the dramatic, thunderclap way of stories that prefer their lessons obvious, but in the quiet, durable way of things that are actually true. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness is not wasted. Sometimes it is the thing that everything else turns on. And you will never know it when you do it. You just do it anyway. Hey, quick question. How are you feeling right now? If the story moved you in any way, if it made you feel something real, something that lingered, do not let that feeling pass without acting on it. Stories like this one are made possible by people like you who stay, who share, and who come back. Please hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. I genuinely want to say hello. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Every comment, every notification tells me that what we are building together here is reaching someone, somewhere, and that it matters. Subscribe to see how this unfolds. Because the next story, it is already waiting for you. Oyutiaro. In a world that often rewards those who take, there was a woman who gave. She did not give because she had enough. She gave because someone needed it. She did not know she was feeding a king. She only knew it was the right thing to do, and that, in the end, was enough to change everything. Kindness is never wasted. Sometimes it saves a kingdom,